And go to the coca. This actually has a stronger and longer history than heroin, mainly because the plant was chewed by local farmers, and all at the time they thought that it was something that kind of helped them work, which, okay, now we know why. Obviously, modern day cocaine's a big deal. Now, people tend to think cocaine and amphetamines, meth, and various other uppers are the same. They're not. Okay? Their effect is similar, but the actual makeup of each is different. Okay? So, get right into it. So, plant, coca shrub. Grows best at high altitudes. So, Peruvian, Bolivian Andes are a big area for it, but any mountainous region can grow it. If you look at those who work in that area, you'll find they still pick some leaves and chew it the same way people might chew chewing gum, tobacco in their mouth, whatever. It's a stimulant. It's very low level if you just take the leaves, okay? Rarely do they have an issue with it being abused. And there's the other one. The Spaniards brought it to Europe, but the leaves dried out. And without being properly processed the way we do now, it lost the low level of potency that it had to begin with. Remember, 2%, so it didn't have much. Well, back in Germany, our chemist, who has nothing better to do but invent new drugs, comes back and figures out the active ingredient, which he labels cocaine. And from that point, it became the go-to drug in patent medicines. Think back to this time period, and if you look at, you can find images on Google, but you can also read about it as well. Cocaine was probably the #1 ingredient in these medicine shows. Want to bring somebody back to life. You want to cure what ails you, whatever it may be, old age, rheumatism. Let's see, what did they call tuberculosis? They had a name for it. I can't think of it now. Consumption. Absolutely correct. Consumption. If you had the consumption, if you had anything wrong with you, take one of my patent medicines. It'll cure what ails you. Usually they were in very bright, colorful bottles with a stopper on there, and almost all of them contained cocaine. So why did people keep buying it? Because it made them feel good. Didn't cure a damn thing, but it made them feel good. So let's keep buying it. Now, obviously, if a person had a serious medical issue and taking these things, it could actually kill them. One of the things that they found actually contributed to deaths of these patent medicine bottles was people who had ulcers, because the drugs would very often cause the ulcers to perforate, and given that medical time period, generally meant death. They would bleed to death internally very, very quickly. So you just did your assignment on Mr. Mariano, where he added cocaine and wine. That is actually still a combination used to this day, except it's not wine. They mix cocaine with. What do they mix it with? Carbonated water. Absolutely. Okay. And in the True Drug Addict, they mix cocaine and heroin. The idea is to mitigate the effects of one with the other. So you kind of get the benefit of both without the extremes of either one. Okay. Pemberton was the one who came up with what he called French cola. It was wine and carbonated water and then a little bit of cocaine. And many of you still drink the original formula to this day, which is Coca-Cola. Coke does contain cocaine. That has never changed. They have a exemption that they got quite some time ago. Paid a lot of money to get it. But they have the exemption. They just had to lower the amount. It's negligible. I don't know what the actual percentage is, because the recipe, you would not believe the vault that Coca-Cola company has built to contain basically a single piece of paper that has the formula for cocaine, or Coca-Cola rather. I mean, it's like Fort Knox type caliber vault where they keep this recipe. Apparently no more than 3 people at any given time are allowed to even know the contents of the vault, where, how, anything. And those are all owners and shareholders. That's it. 3 people. So, 1903 is when they removed most of the cocaine. Got their permission to keep the tiny amount in it, which, like I said, continues to this day. Remember 06, what happens in 06? Pure Food and Drug Act. So now they've got to at least list it on labels. Doesn't mean they can have to stop putting it in there. It just means that they have to list it on the labels, whether they were adding heroin or morphine, cocaine, or anything else. In Canada, it took them a couple years longer, but they went a whole different way and have kept it. They banned cocaine altogether. Something about it bothered them. If you ask people there now, researchers, and they can't give you an answer, they're not sure why they were so afraid of it, but they were. So there had to have been some sort of incident that occurred that got somebody's attention when they passed the law and said, no cocaine whatsoever. Because that was not the case around the world. Canada was the only one who did that. So it's one of those you kind of going, okay guys, what happened? Somebody died from an overdose or something major had to happen, but we don't know. We don't know. And actually in Canada, cocaine laws, I think, are tougher than heroin laws. They have that same mindset even today. Now, our friend Freud, with our ego, super ego in the id, was a doper. Used more than a few, but cocaine was kind of his favorite because it kept him alive and alert, and it's great, it's a wonder drug, and he just thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, until a friend of his drops dead from the cocaine addiction. So Freud, not being a unlearned person, went, well, maybe I'm wrong, and changed his mind. But he didn't really say anything, which, given the popularity of his position and his thoughts, had he said something earlier, would have been beneficial. But he waited a few years before he really said something about it. And then coke and meth, alcohol does the same thing. Can produce a lovely, lovely reaction in the body known as fornication. Not fornication, guys. Okay? Get the mind out of the gutter here. Fornication, where they believe there are bugs, usually ants, but it can be any bugs, underneath their skin. They will open their body to the bone in an attempt to get to those bugs. They are that sure. They'll hold out their arms. See them? Can't you see them? Look at it. They're crawling right up there. And they will rip the flesh off of their own body in an attempt to get rid of those bugs. It's pretty intense. Cocaine, amphetamine, methamphetamine, alcohol, any of these withdrawals can produce this effect. And it is intense. They will end up in full 5-point restraints because they'll just rip things off of their body in an attempt to get to it. Okay? And given the fact that they are in the middle of reactions, they generally don't like to medicate them. I mean, yeah, we have sedation drugs, but that doesn't necessarily work well. Now, there are some that are so bad that they actually have to put them under until the reaction subsides a little bit. I've seen it personally. It's not pretty. This is the company that brought coca leaves into the country. Very, very large amounts of pure cocaine leaves that were processed, of course, into very high quality cocaine. They're the ones, why are they important more than anything else? They're the ones who actually take a small amount of the coca leaves, process them properly. It's washed. It's a washing process that removes the majority of the cocaine, which then goes to Coca-Cola. And these trucks are guarded like you would not believe. They're probably guarded better than most Brinks money trucks. All right? Cocaine is also used in the medical field. Used a lot around eye surgeries and other eye treatments, but there's a few others as well. So hospitals can get shipments of this stuff. It's a high value shipment. So they are very heavily guarded. And the information of when, how, where, what trucks are going to be covering the shipment are not revealed. So, what happens when we take this stuff? Energy. That's why we see it spike on college campuses during finals week. Whether it's cocaine, meth, or other forms of amphetamines, it spikes on most college campuses, both 4-year and 2-year, during finals week. Stay awake, study. I have to cram the entire semester because I haven't shown up to class all semester, but now I got to get a semester's worth of studying in a week before my final. Yeah, like that doesn't happen. Unfortunately, overdoses spike during that time as well. It can be injected, it can be smoked. Problem with smoking, when they smoke their rocks, they go up like a rocket and come down just as fast. That coming down can be a problem, even more so than the going up, because they hit bottom so hard that they can commit suicide, or the intense high. I got a guy in my high school who decided he could fly off the baseball backstop. He flew for about 6 seconds until he hit the ground. He survived, but permanently paralyzed. Okay, so that is, when we say intense, they fly up like a rocket and down just as hard. If you're either injecting it or smoking it. If you snort it, not so fast, takes a little bit longer. High lasts a little bit longer, so it's a common, popular way of using cocaine because you get not quite so fast and you actually get to, quote, enjoy the high for a little period of time, which you don't with the other. You're going up and down so hard, I don't know how they can enjoy it. Anyways, as the level goes down, they get pissy and angry and annoyed at the world. Being around someone who's coming down off of amphetamines is not a pleasant experience, even low level. If it's high level, these guys can get very violent very quickly. Because again, intense high, intense low. And as it peaks out of their system, yeah, they're kind of seriously hard to deal with. They can bottom out to that suicide level. Do 5, 6 rocks in a row, now they're out. They stay down for a short period of time. They have no way to get back up, and they bottom out. They can also have a heart attack from the intense high. It's not just stimulating the brain, it's stimulating every organ in your body. Many, many people, and I would say probably 5 or 6 at least in this room, have undiagnosed heart issues. Even athletes. How many times do we see some kid drop dead on the field, in the court, on the baseball diamond? They all had physicals. They were fine until 5 minutes ago when they weren't fine, because it's not diagnosed. So that sudden, intense push of every organ you have can send an organ into that zone that it can't handle anymore and just stops. So we also call it sudden death syndrome. Distinct problem with this stuff. What exactly is going on in the body? Like I said, the heart rate goes up. They're panting as their breathing increases. The bad part about that, depending on how they are breathing, if it's intense mouth breathing, which usually it is, 2 things are going on. They're not taking in as much oxygen as they think because they're panting so hard and so fast, they're actually increasing their carbon monoxide in their blood, which can cause them to pass out. And of course, you get the dry mouth effect because they're breathing through their mouth. Fine motor skills, if you just, all we have to do is ask them to hold a pencil. And they can barely, Oh, that was a mistake. Thank you. Okay. It was touted for years, one of my best friends used amphetamines, as a way to weight loss, because you're not hungry. If you look at a coke addict or a meth addict, they're always rail thin. Because when they're high, they're high. They're not interested in food. And when they're down, they're looking for more to get high again. Food is way off the radar. If they're on a binge, they may stop eating for a week. That doesn't do the body any good either. Okay. As far as what we can see as officers, blood vessels all go tight, which means pupils go itty. We call it pinpoint. They actually give some officers and anybody who works narcotics, they'll have a little card. It's called a pupilometer that measures, what size the pupils are. If a person's on a drug, that widens it like heroin or narrows it like the amphetamines. Okay, so they can kind of judge how far under the influence they are. Blood pressure spikes. Again, this can cause that fatal heart attack. Normal blood pressure in the average person, not an athlete and not someone with medical problems, is usually, we say, 120/80. That's about right. Athlete, both of those numbers are going to drop. 100/60 because their body's fit. Heart doesn't need to work as hard. These guys, that first hit of cocaine, they can hit 200/160. That's enough to stroke out, which is another byproduct of this. Those blood vessels are constricted. Blood pressure forces blood harder and faster. Why is it any surprise when that tightened blood vessel goes boop and springs a leak? And depending on where it springs a leak, will depend on how fast you die. If it's in the brain, that's your stroke. Where it is in there is whether it's even a possibility that you're going to recover. How much deficit depends on how fast they get to you. If it's elsewhere, number one way, person with a broken leg dies in a hospital, or a broken bone, I should say, not a broken leg, is because they get a clot from the bone that goes down what we call the pulmonary artery. They'll be dead in less than 10 seconds. In a hospital, with every advanced medical procedure available to them, they can't save them because they can't get to it fast enough. And it shuts off all blood flow that goes up. All of it. You can't get to it fast enough. And they're dead. Good friend, not that long ago, died of it. Walks out of the bedroom. I'm having trouble breathing. Goes thud. That was it. That was it. And his wife worked in a hospital. Okay? So, big deal. Sweating, yeah. Trying to deal with these people is like trying to deal with somebody that they're hyper, they're running around like a nutcase, and then trying to get your hands on them is like grease pig contest. Because they're sweating so much, they're soaked. So it's hard to actually hang on to them. Pale, what we call diaphoresis, is just, remember those constriction of the blood vessels? What happens is your body tries to get the blood to the place where it needs it most, the brain and the internal organs. So everything that you see here, limbs, legs, all of that tightens up to get all the blood that's in your body to the place you need it most. Here, the trunk and the brain. Okay, so it's real easy to see. I mean, when they say pale, they're not kidding. Cerebral hemorrhage, that's just a fancy name for a stroke. Heart failure, heart just gives out. Or the heart starts beating in very interesting ways. If you've ever watched any of these Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, you'll hear all this. VFib, bradycardia, tachycardia, these are all abnormal heart rhythms. Most usually what we're going to be talking about is tachycardia, heart speeding up. VFibs, when the bottom half of the heart can't figure out what it's doing, so it goes zzz. It's not pumping anything. It's just wiggling around like a stick in a piece of jello. Okay. Atrial fibrillation, that's the top half doing the same thing. Same thing. Bradycardia is slowing down. Yeah, bradycardia is slowing down. Generally, that's not the issue until this blows apart. Then tachycardia goes away and bradycardia comes into play. Okay? But a lot of people, when it comes to cocaine, this is where it's going to kill them. It's medically. The body just blows up. They can't handle it. So then they're coming down, like I said, pissy. Oh, that barely begins to describe it. Depressed, paranoid. Oh, yes. The entire world's out to get them and prevent them from getting more cocaine. There is such a thing called cocaine psychosis. This is a long-term user who kind of overdid it. Maybe they got a little bit more pure or something along those lines, took a bigger dose than they intended, whatever, okay? And here's where we might see, instead of someone withdrawing, we may see the formication anyways, just because they've kind of gone off the rails mentally. If they're a snorter, blood vessels in the nose will become permanently constricted, which means the blood flow to the nose is compromised. Like I said, this is mainly tissue. There's one bone up here, but the rest of it is just cartilage. It's easily damaged. It's not getting any blood flow. It can't heal from the damage of the cocaine being stuffed up it all the time. Long-term user, this whole thing will just collapse flat on their face, and they generally lose their ability to breathe through their nose. Okay. If you stand in front of a mirror and really inhale, if you have to, hold your mouth shut, but really inhale through your nose, you'll notice your nose flare to take in that greater amount of air. They can't do that. And over time, they can't do it at all because it just all flaps down. And reconstructive surgery, well, they pretty much have to cut her nose off to put it on her face. You can't grow it back. You can't fix it. The only thing they can do at the beginning, possibility, is what we call a tie-back procedure, where they tie the flaps back and open so the person still has the ability to breathe. But if the whole structure collapses, there's nothing left.
Other people lost their symptoms too.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing could just... Regrowth. Okay, so, as I mentioned earlier, do we have medical uses? Yes. Okay. It is the most common ingredient in any, let's see, probably the most common reference you guys would pick up on. You go to the dentist and they, they're doing a tooth here and they numb you up all the way till your eyeball flops out. Okay. Usually what they're giving you is lidocaine. If it ends in cane, it has cocaine in it. It has a numbing effect. There's a lot of different ones that we use. Lidocaine is probably the most common, but anything that ends in cane, Novocaine, various others that are used, those are all just to temporarily numb. Okay, depends on where they give it, how much they give is how long it will last. Anytime there is surgery right around here, they use them simply because there is a tremendous number of nerves in the face. As anybody who goes to the dentist knows, there's just a whole lot of them in there. So they will use it to block all those. And that's what we call a nerve block, where the lidocaine, not Novocaine, this was only lidocaine, is injected directly into the nerve itself, into the nerve sheath. It basically shuts that nerve off for the duration of the surgery. It's also used the same way for eye surgery. You really don't want somebody moving their eyeballs when you're sticking a scalpel into it. That could be a major problem. So you need them, a lot of times you want them awake. I had LASIK done, wide awake, staring at them while they're doing it, okay? They're sticking a laser into your eyeball. They don't want you moving around. But it works great. I love LASIK. He didn't like it. I loved it. I thought it was great. Okay. So yeah, eye stuff. Disadvantage, obviously, if it's absorbed. Okay, now you got a high patient who's going to be wiggling all over the bed. That's a problem. Okay. You may get that woo response. Some people over-respond to any drug. Everybody's responses are individual. She may be able to handle this much. She may be able to handle this much, which is twice as much as her. But wait a minute, she's smaller than it. It has nothing to do with it. It's the individual physiological response. So they have to start very low and then see how the person responds. Maybe they are still feeling pain. Using animals for nerve blocks as well. Some you can give a teeny bit amount, even though it's this monster beast. And then this other one, you have to give them half the bottle full before they can't feel it. Again, individual response. So medical always has to deal with that. And one thing that's an absolute, any medical procedure that involves cocaine, they're going to have, unless it's Novocaine, anything else, they will have IVs too, usually already established. Why? Back to those constriction of the blood vessels. Once those blood vessels tighten down, it gets extremely difficult to insert an IV. If there's a medical emergency, we need that IV because that's how we push other drugs to undo things, fix things, change things, whatever. So if the blood vessels are already constricted, no problem. So they'll start one, usually they'll start one in the groin because you got a nice big femoral artery down there, as well as your standard one that they'll do in the arm. But the idea is to get it in place before they do anything else, so they have an emergency route if necessary, and it's easier to do before the blood vessels collapse down. Anytime you see someone with a heart attack, the first thing they'll do is put an IV in before they give anything else. Why? Because we need that to do the other drugs. And we need, as the blood pressure falls, vessels are going to go knee, then we're not going to be able to start one. Okay. Questions? So why does it feel good? The dopamine gets those receptors going. Woo. Look at me. Because people feel good, well, who doesn't want to feel good? So we take it again. And then you take it again and again and again. The problem comes in twofold. One, it just doesn't last that long. Regardless of how they take it, it doesn't last that long. So that means they have to keep that feeling going, they have to take it and take it and take it. This is not something that lasts for 3, 4, 5 hours. This is 3, 4, 5 minutes. So keep taking it. That's where originally they thought only psychological addiction, which we know that absolutely. But there's also a physical addiction. It's just not as strong as our heroin or morphine. What happens in the brain, though, and this is why the dosage is increased, when you take a nerve cell, which is what a receptor is, and you stimulate it over and over and over, it quits responding and just kind of lays there. It's not really cell death, but it no longer works. So to get the remaining ones working, we take a little bit more. And as they die off, we're taking more, and we're taking more, and we're taking more. Okay. Person who's on cocaine will make some of the worst decisions of their lives, like trying to fly off of a baseball backstop, thinking that they can tightrope walk across the Grand Canyon, or various other lovely attempts that these people have tried to do while under the influence of cocaine, none of which ended well. Remember that fine motor control problem? Yeah, doesn't work well when you're doing stunts. And like I said, they absolutely become dependent on it psychologically and physically. There will be some. Now, it's not as strong as heroin, morphine, and that type of thing. There absolutely is a physical addiction as well. And the more pure the cocaine, the worse it is. Question? Now, there's an oddity for cocaine. You need to know the term kindling. As they grow more of a tolerance in this, some of the receptors are dying off. They can tolerate higher and higher doses. There becomes a weird pattern of sensitization where a dose that normally would be a low dose for them suddenly explodes in their body. They're not quite sure why this happens. They just know it does. So we can get with seizures in the brain itself. Basically what's happening is the neurons inside the brain start firing erratically. Instead of having some tell them, do this, don't do that, it's just firing. Outwardly, it looks like somebody's attached some electrical wires to them and they're just going. obviously that can kill them quite easily. Does not have to be a high dose. They don't understand the mechanics behind this. It's just after a person has been taking cocaine for a period of time, it seems like there's a preset in there that once it reaches that, the brain kind of just says, can't do this anymore. Okay. Another strong death indicators. So, how about use? 70s is when it exploded. We had tennis courts behind my high school, and there was a large cinder block wall, so us errant tennis ball people could not generally hit the balls over the top of the fence. But there were some, so they had an opening in the fence, so you could go back there and yeah, that was dopers section behind that wall. Okay, at any given moment on any given day, there were dopers behind that wall, cocaine, every pill you could shake a stick at, addicts that were shooting heroin everywhere. Right? So you could kind of see how many people were using at the time. The smokers were all in the bathrooms. The plain smokers were all hiding in the bath. If you didn't smoke, you did the second you walked into any bathroom. But the dopers were out behind our wall. We had overdoses. We had suicides. We had one guy who walked in front of a bus because he thought he was Superman, he would stop the bus. He didn't. Yeah. Okay. In the 80s, cocaine kind of became the national problem from a couple perspectives. One, the invention of crack. Cocaine was expensive. It was considered, at that point, primarily a white man's problem because of the expense, until the invention of crack. Crack was cheap. Crack was $5 a dose. Gangs went, ooh, we can make money off of this right out of Breaking Bad. Spend $250 on the materials needed to make the crack. Another couple $100, $300 on the cocaine itself. And all of a sudden you had $4,000 or $5,000 worth of crack to sell. The profit margins were insane. Gangs grabbed onto that as money makers. The big ones in Los Angeles, the two, were the Bloods and the Crips. Given the amount of money that they were making, it erupted into what is still known today as the crack wars between those two groups. But why did everybody get on it? Because as big as it blew up, it made the national news. And gangs nationwide went, where's that them? Welcome to the Bloods of New York. Welcome to the Crips of Chicago. Or the Crips of Houston. The Bloods and Crips are from Compton, California. But you will see those names coast to coast as they adopt it because they want to be just as bad as, what's on TV. These were the guys that were doing drive-bys with fully automatic weapons. They wanted to kill her, so they came into this classroom and opened up. Too bad. But we got her. That's what we wanted. You guys, go piss up a rope. We don't care about you anyways. Okay. People were dying. The LA County morgue was handling 18,000 gang-related homicides a year. That makes national news. And the gangbangers went, oh, we're that bad. The rest of the people went, oh my God, we've got to do something. So crack was called the poor man's cocaine. And the worst thing that came out of it was the sentencing disparity. Because cocaine was still seen as just being psychologically addicting, so it wasn't as much of a problem. And of course, it's a white man's problem, so we don't need to lock them up for the rest of their life. But, crack kills. And they're addicted immediately, so we need to lock them up and throw away the key. So we got a guy with an ounce of crack who gets 20 years. No priors, no criminal history. But he's got an ounce of crack, possession for sale. 20 years. Then our drug dealer over here, our white drug dealer over here, who's got 5 ounces of cocaine, also possession for sale, has got a rap sheet a mile long, gets 2 years. And they're still trying to undo that. They started. Are they successful? No, they're not. Okay, but that was the huge issue in the 1980s. And then you had people like Richard Pryor, who was freebasing cocaine and blew it up in his face. Lighting something with ether in it, that's how you freebase, is to use ether. It's very flammable. You might as well stick your face in your gas tank and light it on fire, because that's pretty much what he did. And you can imagine the end result. Sports figures, entertainers, all tooting how wonderful cocaine is, until something bad happened. So mid-80s, yeah, it's where we call the peak abuse. We start seeing that term, champagne of drugs. We started seeing these individuals with a slightly less than good background actually doing ads, holding a bottle of champagne in one hand, leaning back against an expensive car with a line of cocaine on the car hood. They were actually taking ads out that way. So how do we actually make it into cocaine? Don't try this. So coca plant, coca leaves, all right? Crush them up. Look what they're made with. Soaked in kerosene, flammable shit. Anyways, I mean, who comes up with this crap? Kerosene? Are you kidding me? Anyways, so what the paste that comes out of this is about 60% pure. And for those who wish to inject it, it has to go through a couple more chemical processes to produce what we call cocaine hydrochloride, okay, to make it water soluble. That's the hydro. Okay. This powder is almost milk white. You can easily tell a pile of cocaine next to heroin for 2 reasons. Heroin is not sparkly. Even if they've made it as white as they possibly can, it always is off-white. The cocaine is pure white and it sparkles. It actually has a sparkle effect to it. That's almost 100% pure. Okay. Speedball, I mentioned these before. This is mixing this type of cocaine, pure, with heroin. Keeps them from going too high, but also mitigates that down. The heroin keeps them from going too far down. Okay. We had an inmate. We had released her. She finished her time. 3 days later, she was back, and she was we're hearing her talk to fellow inmates about how she went through $8,000 worth of speedballs in that 3 days she was out. $8,000 worth of speedballs.
Where did she get some money?
Who the hell knows?
How did you get? I don't know.
Probably got it off a pimp friend, whatever. Yeah, who knows? But 8,000. I can see so many other. 8 grand? No, 8 grand ain't going up my nose. Thank you very much. Okay. You'll see a common thing. Anybody have real close like a debit card or something that they can grab? You got one? Anything, any card. There we go. Okay, so what they'll do, I'm going to borrow somebody's phone too. Okay, so I put my cocaine on here, and you'll see them. They want to get it as fine as possible. Then you divide it into the lines. And the lines are the width and length that you're used to use it. Hold one side on the nose and snort away. No, that's your card or your phone. But that's where, they'll also do it from, they have a special little teensy tiny little spoon I thought at first it was a spoon for caviar, because it's some teensy spoon I've ever seen. No, these are special spoons, really baby little teensy weensy little things, and that's more elegant, I guess, than snorting off of somebody's table or something. And very often they'll use a brand new, if they want to show off, they get a brand new crisp $100 bill. Roll it up really tight after they've done all their cutting and stuff, and then they snort through the straw of the $100 bill. It's something to keep in mind. Almost every $100 bill in circulation in the US of A is contaminated with cocaine. Yeah, something to think about. It's one of the reasons why the bank call them the carriage trade. These are people that will go to the bank and demand new notes for that exact reason, because it's very common that any $100 bill that's in circulation has got cocaine on it. Small amounts, but it has cocaine in it. So, good reason never to have $100 in one bill if you buy something.
Put it in the washing machine.
It goes in the washing machine. You contaminate your washing machine with cocaine, so it gets on there in the clothes. Perfect idea. Okay.
He's in my socks now.
It's in your socks. I didn't hear that. Okay, so how do we make cocaine into crack? Like I said, it's called freebase is the term, okay? And that's where you smoke it. And this is where ether comes in. They remove the original chemical, hydrochloride, with ether. Now keep in mind, ether knocks you out. It was one of the first anesthetics, chloroform, we're talking back in the Civil War period, okay? But both of these are intensely flammable. And if you remember anything from chemistry, if you took it, is the liquid or the vapor more flammable? Vapor, by far. So you're smoking this intensely flammable, smart move. Smart move. They started with just the prior type. They had cocaine pipes. Some of them used the old bongs for marijuana and converted them into cocaine pipes. In the 80s, it became very common to use the pipes, but these were actually cocaine pipes. And what they figured out was if they mixed the smokable form with baking soda, it would form these little rocks. And that's where you get rock/crack cocaine. And they sell these rocks individually. $5 to $10, so they called it 4 minutes cocaine. Thing is, because it was so cheap, the amount of people who could afford it, when it's $100 a dose for regular cocaine, well, that's limited. If you don't have that kind of cash to burn, well, most people can come up with $5 or $10, unless it's a college student who just paid tuition, and they don't have $3. But $5, $10, yeah, most people can come up with it. But this is intensely addictive. Intensely addictive. And the violence exploded because of the amount of money there was to be made, because it was so cheap to make. So cheap. Look at what they're talking about here. Baking soda. Yeah, I could buy a 50-gallon drum for $20. Okay. And like I said, once the gangs got a hold of it, and it's still a problem. A lot of systemic gang violence is over turf. And it's not the old style turf where this is our area and we put our graffiti and so on. No, this is a profitable corner to sell dope. And we're going to fight to the death for that corner. Because here's where we make money. Or that profitable tier behind bars. All of this is about the money. Because it's a lot of money to be had. They estimate a $1,000 investment can yield over $1 million in profit. Now, cocaine itself is going down. However, we're seeing a lot more ER visits here. And they're not quite sure why. My personal thought here is cocaine's been off the radar for a while. Crack hasn't changed, meth hasn't changed. But the original cocaine issues we had back in the 60s and 70s kind of fell off. Crack became the big thing. And for some it was meth. When it resurged, people were unfamiliar with making it, the purity level, how to use it. I think that's where the emergency room visits spiked, just because of a lack of knowledge and experience with cocaine. They had plenty of experience with meth and crack, but not so much with the powdered cocaine. Obviously, from a law enforcement perspective, this is something we deal with all the time. Cocaine and crack both are hard simply because it's a powdered form and they can come in very, very small amounts. You know, a kilo of heroin, we don't see as often from a standard law enforcement perspective, a kilo of pure cocaine. By that time, it's already been processed out and packaged. Just remember, the cocaine, the nice, white, pretty cocaine, that's how it's sold. So you're not buying a kilo at a time, unless you're buying it already packaged for sale. Now we're down to those small amounts. It's a lot harder to deal with. So how do we treat these guys? Well, the first thing we have to do is detox them. And this can be ugly. Screaming, singing, where they think they're singing. Formication can be a problem. And there's, unlike some others, there's really not a whole lot of drugs we can help with. There's not much we can give them, if anything. And from any detox center, their belief is nothing. They just have to gut it out. Kudos to them. During that first time period, and it'll last anywhere between 1 to actually 3 days. Your book says 2. It can last up to the 3rd day quite easily. Their depression level goes to the floor. They have to be monitored, strongly monitored for potential suicide. That's how far they go down. What's your question?
So if somebody is addicted to like cocaine or something, but they're older and their body's weaker, how do they can they, if they go cold turkey, they can kill them, correct?
Yes, it could.
So,
That's why it always has to be done under medical supervision. You're not going to do that in a detox center. That's going to be done in a hospital. I know for our inmates, the age was 45 and older, had to be done in the hospital. We wouldn't even try it. In ours, we do have RNs, we do have doctors, but they got nervous for the older ones. Fortunately for us, most of ours are going to be in their 20s, not older, but anyways. Headaches, yeah. Now, they will give some minor stuff, aspirin, Tylenol, okay, but the level of headaches we're having here are well beyond any kind of Tylenol. It really doesn't help much, okay? Irritable, yeah, okay. From a law enforcement perspective, or you're working with them in the jail, they want to fight, they spit, they kick, they're absolutely just, they're not fun. They're absolutely not fun to deal with, and it's just part of the withdrawal. They can't sleep, which makes it worse, because as they get more sleep deprived over that, now we start hallucinating. Not necessarily the formication, but they can start just hallucinating because of the sleep deprivation. So, yeah, and that's going to fuel the irritability, because just about everybody gets pissy when you don't get sleep. So you can see how this all kind of cycles together for a while. Age, as she mentioned, other medical conditions are all going to make this an inpatient experience. It has to be, because it has to be done under medical supervision. It can be done under an outpatient with support. Younger person, maybe hasn't been honored as long, not at high a level of addiction, whatever. But not unusual to see most of these. I'd say 70% probably go inpatient if you want to hope of it being successful. So there are treatment programs, but to really get anywhere, they have to be pretty intensive. These are some of them. Cocaine Anonymous, obviously fostered after the same Alcohol Anonymous. the cognitive behavioral CBT, we've talked about that way back at the beginning, okay? That works best, we'll talk about these, works best from a peer support group, and then the pharmacological side that we can help them with. But the point is, a true treatment program, if it's going to work, is probably going to take all three. Each part of it is not going to work alone. You're going to have all of it. It's going to take time. They're going to fall off the wagon, just like an alcoholic, just like someone who's on other narcotics. Can they do it the first time? Sure. Are they likely to? No. So it's about pick them up, try again, try again. Maybe it's that 100th time where it actually works. So, it's been around a whole long time. There's writings in China of an herb, ephedra. Well, gee, does that sound familiar? Ephedrine, which is the #1 content. Vulgaris, that's the actual name of the plant. German, oh hey, our German chemists are back at it. And they identified what was the big whoopee in that drug, and they named it after its botanical name, ephedrine. So ephedrine's been around since 1887. Long time. Still here. Smith & Kline are one of their biggest pharmaceutical companies in the United States, along with a partner in French labs. They came up with a synthetic form, fully synthetic, made in the lab, that they called amphetamine, because it was similar. The brand name was Benzedrine. You may have heard that one. It was available without a prescription, over the counter, as a central nervous system, that's CNS, stimulant, wake you up, get you through the day, as well as slim down the appetite. Okay. Anything that ends in that INE probably has some relationship to any one of these chemical compounds. Amphetamines were actually troops. If they're in the field, they get bagged lunches, which had cigarettes in them, cookies in them, sandwiches in them, all kinds of stuff. And I bet you didn't know it also had amphetamine in them. They had a little envelope that had amphetamines in there. Because soldiers need to stay awake on the battlefield. A sleeping soldier is a dead soldier, or at least while you sleep, your partner gets killed. So we need you awake. They've given them LSD. There's a whole laundry list of drugs that soldiers have been treated with, generally without their knowledge. Okay, they didn't know what they just told them this was a good thing. You know, it'll help. Just take them. They didn't know they were amphetamines for the longest time. But you know, when troops are advancing, think of World War II, and they're advancing through the trenches of Europe under the bombardments that they had. You don't need your soldiers falling asleep. Well, we've been on our feet for 24 hours. Well, we still got another 16 hours to go. Here, take these and let's keep going. And that's pretty much what was happening. Of course, now, modern, stay awake. When I lived in California, told you I show horses. We would bring our horses out here. A lot of the big shows are out here in Oklahoma and Texas. That's 22 hours, one way. That's a long freaking drive. And we had this lovely little thing to help called NoDoz. Still available. It's a lightweight version of Benzedrine. It has the same coffee content or caffeine content as some coffee. And by the way, caffeine is another stimulant, amphetamine in that INE. You guys do it with Monster and Red Bull and various other energy drinks. I love reading the content on those cans. I'm like, you guys gave us crap for 2 little itty bitty NoDoz that are about 1/10 of what's in a standard can of Monster, and you're giving us crap for NoDoz? Okay. So yeah, keep them awake. Another thing that spikes during finals week, Yeah. Okay. It used to be the no-dos. They'd see packages of no-dos in all the trash cans. Now they overflow with Monster, Red Bull, and various other energy cans. Problem is, we're back to you youth who believe you are absolutely indestructible. You have no idea how the internal parts of you work. And if everything's working the way it's supposed to, and you don't want to find out the hard way when you're on your 12th can of God knows what during your cramming for whatever exam you're cramming for. Because we find the overdoses, sudden cardiac death of students all the time, and usually attributed to something along the lines. It's not just Red Bull or Monster. There's plenty of others that are out there. I'm sorry? Someone mentioned another one? I mean, there's a bunch of them out there. In the 60s, we saw injectables come out, and those were a little too rough for most addicts, a little too intense. It was still out there, but addicts were more into the pill form than anything else, called them whites, because they were usually white. Feds started getting nervous, so mid-60s, they started kind of cracking down on it just a little bit. Wasn't that it wasn't still available, very much is, still is today, but just not quite as easy. Abuse kind of peaked in the late 60s and would continue to about 71, 72. Then it kind of fell out of favor. People weren't interested. They were more interested in other drugs that were out there. It wasn't because, some law was passed or anything else. People just kind of, okay, I don't want to look like a gerbil on Benzedrine, so, I'll go take some other drug. But then it comes back. The need to stay awake. We had a serious problem with this. Truck drivers. No dose was bad enough. That's just caffeine. There's nothing else in it. But now they were using whites, pure amphetamines. That's not a good thing. Somebody at the end of 80,000 pounds of rolling disaster, and it can be something as simple as they have a heart attack. Drugs wear off and they fall asleep. Remember that fine motor control issue? Yeah, driving a truck's not like, So, yeah, that's a problem. I really don't want my pilot who's staying awake for an extra flight zoned to the gills on amphetamines. Woo, Mr. Lukes, wee! Yeah, with a commercial airline? Just what we need. Problem. So it kind of exploded back up. Not necessarily with the original drugs that were popular in the 60s, but the same chemical makeup was out there. Okay. So we'll look a little bit at the forms here. I can kick you loose. So dextroamphetamine. Medical literature will usually just say D-amphetamine. It's very potent. Okay, this is get you attention. This is like the difference between someone freebasing cocaine and drinking a Red Bull. Okay, big difference. Meth, common names you'll hear, called speed. More usually just meth or crank. It's a little more common. Okay. It is amphetamines that has been chemically adjusted just a little bit to allow it to absorb faster. So we've turned it into cocaine. So they go, whew, and they come down just as hard. Okay. Meth is profoundly addictive. Search on the internet, and everybody, cops love to do this. They'll show pictures before and after of those using different drugs. And the one that seems to be the one that shows the most incredible change is the meth user. One of the most common ways a cop can see it is what we call a meth mouth. Their teeth fall out because they no longer take care of their teeth. There's a lot of bacteria in their mouth, and they literally rot in their mouth. It's pretty gross. It's pretty gross. The cocaine user with the flat nose, okay, yeah, we'll see that when they get skinny. But the meth user will just kind of jump out in your face. It'll be real real obvious. And with that happy thought, go ahead and finish this last bit of chapter 10, then we'll do the review. So, we're talking about effectiveness. So what happens at first, the acute effects, this is what happens immediately within the body. Obviously, very similar to cocaine, it's a stimulant. But the biggest issue here and why it's attractive to some, not only the fact it's a lot cheaper, but the effect lasts a whole lot longer than cocaine. So we don't have the up, down, depending on how they ingest it, whether it's injected, snorted, or so on. Sympathetic autonomic activity, what does that mean? Well, all different parts of your body that operate on their own, that you have limited control over, increase. Okay? Breathing rate can increase to the point they almost become panting to look at them. Heart rate can go through the roof, and I mean through the roof, well over 200 beats a minute. Hyperthermia, what's that? Anything that's hyper is up. Hypo is low. But what's thermia? Heat, absolutely. These guys will strip naked because they're so overheated. If you've ever taken a little bit of alcohol with you when you're skiing, snowboarding, or anything along those lines, and why we also yell at people not drink while they're sitting in a hot tub. What happens is, as the blood vessels open up, heat starts escaping. So you feel really warm, especially if you're in some winter activity. So have a little schnapps, tastes pretty good, except you're losing heat. It feels like you're warm, but you're not. You're actually losing heat, and that's why people freeze to death, drown in a hot tub, and so on. So these guys get so overheated, they'll strip naked in an attempt to cool off. Blood pressure, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. Major potential issue with heart attack, stroke, so on and so forth. What they like about it so much is they feel very euphoric. It's that feel-good feeling. It's like I can do anything. And they certainly get this idea that they can leap off a baseball backstop and fly. Okay, we had one that was sure he could stop a bus. Didn't work so well. Convulsions, yeah. Basically, that's brain having a seizure. Okay. Unfortunately, if there's no one around, that alone can kill you simply because most people stop breathing during a seizure. So that's a problem. Chest pains, well, usually that means your heart's having some issues somewhere. Can be a full-blown cardiac arrest. And again, if nobody's there to call for help, and as much as people like to believe it, and it's useful, it's just not as good as the Red Cross would have you believe, doing CPR in the field, even by trained individuals, besides the fact it tends to break a lot of ribs, is not super successful. It just isn't. So, again, heart starts not working. Your chances of living, especially if you're sitting in a bunch of group of addicts, like they're going to be looking at you going, like, huh? How many times have you guys seen videos where someone's just sitting there taping while somebody's God knows what? Okay? That doesn't help survival rates. We're going to document your death. That's what's going to happen. Obviously, the stroke, you blow a clot, depending on where it goes. You've got about 2 hours after a stroke for major medical intervention to have any hope at all. Any. So back to again, no help. Anybody in here know how to recognize even the signs of a stroke? Yeah, maybe 1 or 2 persons.
You start turning pale, right?
Nope. Number one thing you ask them to do is ask them if they can smile. What'll happen is one side will go up, the other side won't move because the paralysis starts. We've got to get that clot passed and the brain swelling down in a very, very short period of time before that deficit becomes permanent. But the simplest thing you can do is ask them to smile. They won't be able to. Their face will distort. Okay. It's a very obvious sign. Obviously, over time, using this stuff, well, we get those hallucinations, okay? Those bugs are crawling along their bones. That's a problem. And again, if this really happens without intervention, again, if nothing else, think about it. If they're ripping chunks of flesh off of their arm, how much damage are they going to do with that wound being wide open to the bone itself? Yeah, issues. These are two things that we see. They will break their own teeth. One of the strongest muscles in the body is what we call the masseter. Controls the jaws. Okay. And if you start grinding, this is why dentists a lot of times will ask you, do your teeth hurt or your muscles sore in the morning? Some people just grind their teeth at night. These guys do it to an nth degree level where teeth will break. Okay. So, yeah, issues. Anyways, questions about amphetamines? And let's move into the long-term effects here. Paranoid? Yeah. Okay. The whole world's out to get them, especially if they're coming down. The delusions can get really weird and feed into that paranoia. Okay. Everybody they see on the streets out to get them. These are the ones that you worry about violence because you don't know what's going on in their head. Okay. So they may suddenly see you as a threat. As they're using, their moods will go up and down so fast you can't track it. So you don't know how to interact with someone who's in the midst of using this. Anything can set them off. That psychosis is an oddball. This can show up well after they withdraw, and we're not quite sure why. This is a water-soluble drug, so it generally is excreted out the urine. It's not like LSD that sits up there in the brain in the fat cells. This one doesn't. Yet we have this that can show up well after they have stopped taking it. So it's got to be sitting latent, not working, somewhere in the body until something somehow wakes it up. And because all of the drug is gone, people don't put the two together. And the people who have seen, I've never seen it. People that have seen it said it resembles a paranoid schizophrenic going off the rails. So, yeah, that's pretty intense. And they have linked it to Parkinson's. So for someone who's used this over a long period of time, meth has the same issues. They may be more predisposed to Parkinson's at a later age, which is not something that develops when they're young. Okay. Meth is basically a very strong amphetamine. So, fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine, amphetamines. That kind of give you the connection. Originally, we called them speed freaks. Okay, you know the term tweaking now. Okay, that was pretty much what they were doing. We just called them speed freaks instead of tweakers. Now we use the term tweakers. Okay. What got people's attention is, again, this is kind of the poor man's cocaine thing, but this was the good stuff. It starts showing up in rural, heavily unemployed, very low socioeconomic areas, out in the sticks, kind of where they were doing the prohibition alcohol way back in the day. Well, now we got the meth labs out there for pretty much the same reasons, because it is out in the middle of nowhere. Neighbors might be half a mile away, so there's no one to see it. They're building the lab in some barn that was built in 1880, so it's not like anybody else is going to see it again. Bad part is the chemicals that they use to make meth blow up very spectacularly. Not only is it a toxic environment for the people making it, but just a mistake isn't tolerated well because of the level of combustibility. Okay. They've seen a lot of kids ending up in foster care simply because they're exposed to it. The fumes are toxic. If you ever see anybody go in a lab, it look like we're going into some hot Ebola zone somewhere from the amount of protective gear they have on, their own air supply, because it's that bad inside. We've seen it multiple times. Somebody's got a meth lab in their house, usually in the basement. and they make an ooze. It not only blows up that house, it blows up 2 or 3 houses on either side. And this is a small scale lab. You can imagine a bigger lab. So currently, first they started with trying to control the precursors through this first act and increasing the penalties. I don't know why they kept trying that. We've done it before with this, the pot, lock them up and throw away the key, and it didn't work then, but let's try it again, see if that works. Yeah, it didn't. But in 05, and it has tightened since then, this is why when you go to a CVS and you want to get some Sudafed, you can't just walk up to the thing and pick out your Sudafed and walk out the door. You can't do that. You have to go up to the counter, you have to show your ID, make sure you're of age, and they'll give you a package. Or if they're really bored, they might give you 2. Okay? Why? Because the active ingredient in Sudafed and other decongestant drugs is ephedrine. So people were buying it, 100 packages at a time. You'd think somebody might say something if you put 100 packages on but they weren't, so this was their way of controlling it. The response by the meth community was to do smaller labs so they didn't have to have a huge amount of the stuff. Or on the flip side, they would hijack the trucks that carry liquid ephedrine. That is now considered a hazmat transport, very often under escort. Because, where else can you get, whatever those things carry, 10,000 gallons worth of the stuff, okay? Yeah, so they're going to protect it. Then there's a kind of intense form, ice, which is crystal meth, sometimes just called crystal. It's just a smokable form, which means as they take a hit off of this, 100% of the drug is probably going to pass the blood-brain barrier. Inhalation is very efficient. So they, hard, fast, and sometimes permanent. Bad part about meth, ice in particular, highly addictive, highly destructive. If they're snorting it or inhaling it, they will destroy the cartilage in their nose. We talked about meth mouth, okay? It really destroys the teeth. Quite a few are, by the time they come in the jail, they have full dentures. And then they're 32 years old because they don't have a tooth left in their mouth. Okay. Their withdrawal is similar to cocaine. What's different is these 2 parts. First, the crash takes a little bit longer than it does for cocaine. It doesn't last as long as cocaine. So it starts a little bit slower, peaks, and then kind of fades. Where it's profoundly different are those cravings. They had always said nicotine cravings lasted the longest, which the average is about 12 to 14 weeks, until they started counting this. And they found the cravings here last even longer than nicotine. Right. So that's something in an addict trying to keep the control for that long. That's 4 months. That's a long time to be controlling somebody's triggers. Again, it can be done in or outpatient. However, inpatient by far is preferred because of that possibility of the psychosis. You don't want them on the outside if they go off the rails. Unfortunately, this is the one with the highest relapse rate. Heroin is actually second. This has the highest relapse. So addicts here are extraordinarily difficult to get off the drug. Extraordinarily difficult. Now this next one, don't worry about it, won't show up on the exam, but have to mention it. Cathinone. This was one of these, let's mess with the drug chemically and see what happens. So they added a simple oxygen atom, not even a whole molecule, atom, teeny tiny. And went, ooh, look what this is. Very, very strong, very, very strong. You guys know it as bath salts. More common name out there. For whatever reason, people tend to think this is a real mild form, so they're comfortable with it. Big mistake. That's like saying fentanyl is the more relaxed form of morphine. Okay? Not so much. And this is also under that band, changing the molecular structure of a drug just so they can fly into the radar of it being a banned drug. They're still doing it. You know, as fast as we figure out one, they do another one. So anyway, just had to mention this one. Can we use them as medications? Of course we do. We use them as medications all over the place. The ADHD, ADD, and all the different variations of this are the most common drugs reach for here that are both part of the amphetamine family, stimulant drugs, Ritalin and Adderall. But we're running into all kinds of issues with prescription abuse here. People reading up on how to be ADHD so they can get the prescription, sometimes for themselves, sometimes for a friend, a family member, or to sell it, okay, because it's worth money on the streets. Less so Adderall, but both of them. Both of them. One of the more common uses for this, besides the ADHD stuff, is narcolepsy. These guys are really, really interesting if you happen to see one, because they'll be sitting there and they'll be talking and then they just go to sleep between one breath and the next. And they can do it while driving. They can do it while walking. It's just the brain shuts down. They shut down. And sometimes they're extraordinarily difficult to wake back up. This drug obviously stops that from happening. They have to be, I think it varies by state, but like 2 or 3 is like epilepsy. 2 or 3 years free from episodes before they can get a license. That has to be well controlled by the drug. And of course, all the stuffy nose stuff, anything that says it has a decongestant in it, has got one of these stimulants in it. So how were they abusing it? Well, the main thing was they were crushing the pills and snorting them, okay? But that leads to a very uncontrolled dose. They have no idea how strong the pill is. They don't know if it's a real pill. Is it being mixed with something else? That's always a problem with these drugs. If somebody buys it, hey, I've got, here's 5 of these pills, and they're Ritalin, except they just handed you 5 fentanyl pills. It just looks like Ritalin. Well, that's going to mean you're dead. So, yeah, a lot of hospital visits here. We've got people that are trying to take Ritalin because, well, I'm struggling in school, so I need a little bit of help, so this would be good. That's not how prescription drugs work, but it's an issue. People do it. Okay? They call these smart pills, and we're seeing the use go up. One of the things the manufacturer that was requested by government cops and the DEA was to coat the pills in a substance that makes them impossible to crush. They just turn into a lumpy, gooey thing. They can't snort it. Doesn't mean they can't eat it, because they probably will, but at least they can't snort it. Eating it mitigates a lot of the effects. Okay. They're trying. Questions about anything?